Hello, and thank you for joining us. CBS News has learned President Trump has been told the U.S. is prepared for potential military strikes on Iran as soon as this Saturday, although no decision has been made yet. Sources also tell CBS News the Pentagon will be moving some personnel out of the Middle East over the next few days in case of possible preemptive or counter strikes from Iran. The U.S. and Iran are currently engaged in indirect nuclear talks. They held their second round of negotiations yesterday in Geneva. Both sides described the talks as positive. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said earlier today, while diplomacy is always the first option, there are, quote, many reasons and arguments one could make for a strike against Iran. Let's bring in James Laporta. He's CBS News' national security coordinating producer. What more can you tell us?
Thanks for having me. So the way to think about this is for the last several weeks, the U.S. military has been moving assets around the globe. Think of it like a chessboard. You're moving your pieces around the board in order to strategically place those positions for an attack. So today at the White House, when there was a meeting at the Situation Room, when it was asked, when can we strike, it was said that it was as possibly as this weekend, that we could strike this weekend with the assets that are already in place. Separate from all this, we have the Ford Carrier Group moving into the region, but which is right now off the coast of West Africa. So it's not yet reached the Middle East. But with the assets currently in place, the U.S. could strike Iran right now. However, the president has not made a decision on that, and our sources have been said that the timeline for a strike, if a strike happens at all, could extend well beyond this weekend. But as a precautionary, the U.S. military started to move personnel out of the region, moving them to either European command or back to the United States. That is a standard practice that typically happens. It's not actually a signal that an attack will happen.
James Laporta, keep us posted. Thank you. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now. What's the latest from the White House?
Lindsay, you mentioned it a little bit earlier in terms of White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterating that diplomacy remains the first option. At the same time, during her briefing, she sent a similar warning that we've heard from President Trump, that Iran should make a deal quickly that they will be wise to, or they could potentially face consequences such as when the U.S. struck nuclear facilities in Iran last June. Leavitt also said that she did not have any information on deadlines when it comes to diplomatic talks between the U.S. and Iran. So they're continuing the pressure from the pulpit of the White House, in addition to the physical military forces that James mentioned are being moved to that region. We also know that last December, President Trump met with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister for Israel, in Mar-a-Lago, and said that the U.S. would support Israeli strikes on Iran's ballistic missiles program if a deal between D.C. and Tehran falls through.
We're also learning about some of the politics coming out of the White House, the administration's plans for their approach to the midterms. What have you learned?
We learned that numerous top officials, including the president's chief of staff, as well as several cabinet officials, met with about 75 to 100 attendees in Capitol Hill to kind of strategize ahead of this November's midterm elections. Though a senior administration official told CBS News it wasn't necessarily a discussion, it was more instruction, giving potential surrogates for the administration guidance and kind of where they should be looking in terms of battleground districts. We also know that pollster Tony Fabrizio, a longtime pollster for President Trump, gave slides on what voters care about, what messages will resonate on the economy. He told attendees in the room that banning stock trading for Congress, transparency when it comes to health insurance data, as well as the president's tax cuts are popular economic messages that they should tout on the road. But talking about how the president has closed the border and restricted immigration is not. We know that President Trump will be in Rome, Georgia to talk about the economy, as the White House says that he will be traveling more domestically in order to kind of replicate the base turnout he had in 2024 this November, even though his name is not on the ballot.
Aaron Navarro, thank you.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said President Trump prefers a negotiated settlement with Iran, but she also said this at today's briefing.
There's many reasons and arguments that one could make for a strike against Iran. The president had a very successful operation as commander-in-chief with Operation Midnight Hammer, as you know, as you just said, totally obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. The president has always been very clear, though, with respect to Iran or any country around the world, diplomacy is always his first option, and Iran would be very wise to make a deal.
Charlie Daggett is with me here now, our national security expert and reporter. I'm so glad to have you here. James Laporta, one of our colleagues, has just sent in an email, which I will summarize to you because it was just summarized in my ear.
Okay.
That senior military advisors, the president have told him that the military is ready for a strike, could be as ready as early as Saturday, but the timeline has not been decided upon and could very well stretch far into the future.
Right.
That is probably consistent with what you know. It's consistent with what the Pentagon does, plans, makes preparations when the president is indicating he wants to have live options. Walk us through where this feels like it's heading.
Major, that's exactly right. And that jives exactly with the information that I'm getting as well. You know, they're preparing for every contingency, U.S. officials tell me. What does that look like? It could be a strike package, limited strike package, air strikes. Then they have to be concerned at retaliation. This is why we've seen this massive military buildup there. And I don't want to bang the drums of war, but I have to underline what we're talking about. So you have the Lincoln the Lincoln aircraft carrier that's been there for a few weeks already in place. 10 destroyers or cruisers. These are guided missile cruisers, again, already in place in the region. The real tell for me, and James will support this, is the arrival or the potential arrival of the USS Gerald R. Ford. This is really important because that would not have been a decision that was taken lightly. It was already at sea. It had gone from European command to the Caribbean. It was involved, right, with the Maduro capture. Now turned around to go to the Middle East, possibly in a shooting war, kinetic war. So you are looking at a substantial, considerable military buildup. Haven't even mentioned the F-22 fighter jets, the F-35s that are already there, the cargo refuelers, the cargo planes, the aerial refuelers. You're talking about a buildup, again, for every contingency. If the United States were to strike Iran, they have to be prepared for how Iran is going to retaliate.
And I want to read to you something that a reporter who's very well read in on the region.
Yep.
A byline that you follow, a byline that I follow. Barak Ravid for Axios. Quote, a U.S. military option in Iran would likely be a massive, weeks-long campaign that would look more like full-fledged war than last month's pinpoint operation in Venezuela, sources say.
Yep.
Consistent with what you also
I can't argue with that. Again, that's what they're preparing for, right? They're preparing for that sort of contingency. And the reason here, Major, if you remember Operation Midnight Hammer back in June, right? That was a limited strike, big strike, using B-2 bombers left from the United States, not even involved, right? The Iranians did attack, and they attacked Al Udeid, our base in Qatar. What they're looking at now is if there is an existential threat to this regime, they're going to press everything. They might go after Israel. They might go after U.S. forces. There are 30 to 40,000 U.S. forces in that region. They have to be prepared for an extended, long-term, drawn-out conflict that we haven't seen with Iran. And that is why they're moving so many of those military assets in there. They're going to be looking at Iran's missile capabilities, which they still have. They'll be looking at Iran's capability to strike in these sort of areas around where the U.S. naval assets are deployed and they're exposed. So they're preparing for a multi-pronged attack if Iran should retaliate, as they are expected to do if the United States launches strikes.
And, of course, as we discussed with Sam Vinograd at this table yesterday on the program, this very visible military footprint might be also viewed as a negotiating strategy. Like, we're serious. You better cut a deal. The White House keeps saying cut a deal, or the consequences will be dire. Charlie Daggett, great stuff as always. Thanks you so much.
As we've been reporting, top national security officials have told President Trump the military is ready for potential strikes on Iran as soon as Saturday. But sources familiar with the discussions told CBS News the timeline for any action is likely to extend beyond this weekend. President Trump has not yet made a final decision about whether to strike, said the officials. A Pentagon spokesperson said they had no information to provide. This comes after the U.S. and Iran held their second round of indirect nuclear talks in Geneva yesterday. President Trump wants Iran to completely dismantle its nuclear program. But despite the possibility of military action, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said today the president would prefer to avoid hostilities.
The president has always been very clear, though, with respect to Iran or